The femur bone was still wearing fragments of blue denim when Forest Ranger Dmitry Kozlov pulled it from beneath the rotting floorboards. 21-year-old Cassian Walsh's student ID card lay pressed against the bone, the plastic warped but readable, his face smiling up from a photograph taken 3 months before he vanished into the Canadian wilderness. The bone had been gnawed clean by rodents, but the bite marks were too large, too deliberate. Something else had been feeding in this cabin. Kozlov had spent 15 years searching these woods for the 4 University of British Columbia students who disappeared in July 1998. Now he was staring at what remained of their weekend camping trip, buried under a structure that appeared on no government survey, built by hands that left no trace of their identity. Cassian Walsh, Meridian Chen, Tobias Aldrich, and Serafina Voss had been the kind of students who made professors remember why they loved teaching. All 4 were enrolled in the Environmental Sciences program at UBC, passionate about wilderness conservation, experienced hikers who treated the backcountry like their personal laboratory. They had logged over 200 hours of field research together across British Columbia's most remote regions. When they drove Walsh's modified Jeep Cherokee into the coastal mountains on July 18, 1998, they carried enough supplies for 5 days: satellite phones, emergency beacons, and detailed topographical maps marked with their planned route. They were supposed to return by July 22nd. They never made it past their first night. The search began when Walsh's girlfriend, Rebecca Hartman, called campus security after the group failed to show up for a mandatory field research meeting within 6 hours. Royal Canadian Mounted Police helicopters were circling Garibaldi Provincial Park where the students had filed their backcountry camping permit. Search teams found their campsite intact on the shores of Cheakamus Lake. Tents still zipped shut, sleeping bags laid out as if their owners had simply evaporated. Walsh's Jeep sat in the packing area with the keys hanging from the ignition. Their food supplies untouched, cameras loaded with film from earlier that day showing the 4 students setting up camp, laughing, completely unaware that something was watching them from the tree line. But the search teams missed the most important detail hidden in those final photographs. In the background of a picture Meridian Chen took of Serafina Voss collecting water samples, barely visible through the forest canopy, was the corner of a wooden structure. The cabin was positioned on a ridge exactly 800 meters northeast of their campsite, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Chun's camera had captured the only known evidence of the building's existence, and investigators wouldn't discover it until 15 years later, when digital enhancement technology finally revealed what human eyes had missed. The official search lasted 43 days and covered 400 square kilometers of wilderness. Teams deployed tracking dogs, thermal imaging equipment, and underwater search units that combed every creek and lake within a 20-kilometer radius. They found absolutely nothing. No torn clothing, no chopped equipment, no human remains, no evidence of animal attacks. The 4 students had simply ceased to exist somewhere between setting up their tents and sunrise the next morning. The case file remained active but dormant until August 2013, when Dmitry Kozlov transferred to the Squamish district and inherited a filing cabinet full of cold cases that had haunted his predecessor into early retirement. Kozlov approached the Walsh case differently than the original investigators. Instead of focusing on the campsite, he studied the students themselves, particularly their academic work and research interests. All 4 had been studying the impact of illegal logging operations on protected wilderness areas, and their field notes contained detailed observations about unmarked access roads, evidence of unauthorized tree cutting, and what Tobias Aldrich described as systematic habitat destruction by parties unknown. 3 weeks before their disappearance, Serafina Voss had submitted a research paper documenting over 30 instances of illegal logging activity in areas that were supposed to be completely protected by federal law. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In September 2013, Kozlov received a call from Marcus Delacroix, a retired logging supervisor who had worked the region for 30 years before developing lung cancer from decades of sawdust exposure. Delacroix was dying and wanted to clear his conscience about something that had bothered him for 15 years. He remembered for young people asking questions about tree cutting permits at a remote site in July 1998. But what stuck in his memory was not the students themselves. It was the fact that his crew had been explicitly ordered to clear out of that entire sector for 2 weeks, with no explanation and threats of termination if they discussed the shutdown with anyone. Delacroix's information led Kozlov to employment records for Titan Forestry Corporation, a logging company that had operated under 6 different names between 1995 and 2000. The company's permits showed authorized cutting in 12 sectors of Garibaldi Provincial Park, but government records indicated that logging was completely prohibited in that region. Someone had been issuing fraudulent permits, harvesting protected old-growth forest, and using the profits to fund operations that left no paper trail. The students had stumbled onto evidence of a criminal enterprise worth millions of dollars, and someone had decided they were too dangerous to leave alive. The cabin where Kozlov found the remains was built from logs that had been illegally harvested from the exact area the students were researching. Carbon dating on the wood showed the trees were cut in 1997, meaning the structure had been built specifically as a base of operations for the illegal logging. But the cabin served another purpose. The interior walls were lined with sand, material typically used in recording studios, and the floor had been reinforced to support heavy equipment. Most disturbing were the metal rings bolted into the support beams and the drainage system that had been professionally installed beneath the floorboards. The students' remains told the story their voices never could. Forensic analysis revealed that all four had been alive when they were brought to the cabin, but none had survived more than 48 hours. Cassie and Walsh's bones showed evidence of repeated blunt force trauma to the skull. Meridian Chen's ribcage had been systematically broken, bone by bone. Tobias Aldrich's remains indicated he had been suspended from the ceiling rings for extended periods before finally succumbing to internal injuries. Serafina Voss had fought the longest, based on defensive wounds on her hands and arms, but she too had eventually been overwhelmed by injuries too severe for survival. The most chilling discovery was a metal box hidden in the cabin's foundation, containing detailed records of the illegal logging operation and evidence that the students' deaths were not isolated incidents. The box held driver's licenses, camping permits, and personal belongings from at least 12 other individuals who had vanished in the region between 1995 and 2003. Environmental activists, government inspectors, freelance journalists, and amateur naturalists who had gotten too close to the truth about the forest destruction. The criminal organization had been systematically eliminating anyone who threatened their operation, and the cabin had served as their execution site for nearly a decade. But the investigation hit a wall when every lead pointed to people who had conveniently died or disappeared themselves. Titan Forestry Corporation had been dissolved in 2001, its assets transferred to shell companies registered in countries with no extradition treaties. The fraudulent permits had been issued by government officials who had since died in accidents that looked suspicious in hindsight but had never been investigated as homicides. Even Marcus Delacroix died of his cancer before he could provide formal testimony, leaving Kozlov with evidence of massive corruption but no living suspects to prosecute. The cabin itself had been destroyed by a forest fire in 2006, 7 years before Kozlov found the burial site. The fire had been officially classified as caused by lightning, but meteorological records showed no thunderstorm activity in the region during the time period when the blaze started. Someone had eliminated the evidence, but they had not been thorough enough to excavate the burial site beneath the foundation. The concrete footings had protected the students' remains and the metal evidence box from both the fire and the elements, preserving the proof of what had happened but leaving investigators with a crime scene that had been deliberately destroyed. Today, the Walsh case remains technically unsolved despite overwhelming evidence of what happened and who was responsible. The illegal logging operation generated an estimated $47 million in profits between 1995 and 2003. Enough money to buy silence, eliminate witnesses and cover tracks so thoroughly that justice became impossible. The 4 students died because they cared enough about protecting the environment to ask questions that powerful people did not want answered. Their research papers, recovered from their abandoned campsite, documented the destruction of over 3,000 acres of protected old-growth forest, habitat that had taken centuries to develop and could never be replaced. Dmitry Kozlov retired in 2018, 5 years after finding the students' remains, haunted by a case where he knew exactly what had happened but could never prove it in court. The burial site has been sealed and designated as a memorial, but visitors are rare because the location is not marked on any public maps. The students' families finally received closure about their children's fate, but the people responsible for their deaths continue to live free, protected by layers of corruption that extend far beyond a single illegal logging operation. The physical evidence told a story of systematic torture that lasted far longer than the 48 hours indicated by initial forensic analysis. Hidden cameras installed throughout the cabin had recorded everything, and the recovered footage revealed details that investigators wished they had never seen. Cassian Walsh had been forced to watch his friends die one by one, kept alive specifically to witness their suffering before finally succumbing to his own injuries. The recordings showed that the killers had professional knowledge of human anatomy, prolonging the students' agony while extracting information about who else knew about their research, and what evidence they had shared with professors or government agencies. The torture sessions were conducted with clinical precision by individuals who had clearly done this before. Voice analysis of the recovered audio identified at least 6 different people participating in the interrogations, including 2 women, and a man with a distinct French-Canadian accent who appeared to be directing the proceedings. The students revealed everything under torture, including the location of backup research data they had stored in safety deposit boxes and cloud servers. Information that allowed the criminal organization to systematically destroy evidence of their illegal activities across multiple provinces. What made the recordings even more disturbing was the casual conversation between the killers. During breaks in the torture sessions, they discussed logging schedules, equipment maintenance, and profit margins while the students bled out in the background. The organization operated like a legitimate business, complete with hierarchy, performance metrics, and quarterly planning meetings. Murder was simply another operational expense, budgeted alongside fuel costs and equipment rental. The students' deaths were discussed with the same emotional detachment as routine equipment maintenance. The forensic accountant assigned to trace the money discovered that the illegal logging operation was far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The organization controlled shell companies in 17 countries, operated 3 separate shipping networks, and maintained bribery relationships with officials and federal environmental agencies, provincial park services, and local law enforcement. The students had unknowingly documented just one small piece of a criminal empire that stretched from British Columbia to international timber markets in Asia and Europe. Bank records revealed that government officials had received regular payments, disguised as consulting fees, equipment rentals, and charitable donations. Parks Canada Director Malcolm Hendricks had received $340,000 between 1996 and 2002 through a fake environmental consulting company. Royal Canadian Mounted Police District Commander Patricia Beaumont had been paid $180,000 for providing advance warning about planned raids and investigations. Even Federal Environment Minister Douglas Crawford had accepted $89,000 in campaign contributions from companies that existed only on paper, created specifically to launder illegal logging profits. The corruption extended deep into academic institutions as well. The University of British Columbia's Environmental Sciences Department had received $2.3 million in research grants from organizations connected to the illegal logging network. Department head Dr. Lawrence Steinberg had personally approved research projects designed to provide scientific cover for habitat destruction, publishing papers that minimized the environmental impact of clear-cutting and supported expanded logging in protected areas. The students who died had been unknowingly funded by the same criminal organization they were investigating. Their tuition and research grants paid for with profits from environmental destruction. The most shocking discovery was evidence that the students' deaths had been planned weeks before they ever entered the wilderness. Cell phone records showed that their movements had been tracked from the moment they left Vancouver, with updates sent to the cabin every few hours during their drive into the mountains. The criminal organization had monitored their communications, intercepted their emails, and even planted listening devices in their shared laboratory space at the university. The students had walked into a trap that had been carefully prepared based on inside knowledge of their research plans and camping itinerary. The satellite phones the students carried had been remotely disabled before they even reached their campsite, cutting off their ability to call for help when they realized they were in danger. Their emergency beacons had been equipped with modified batteries that would drain within hours instead of lasting for days as designed. Even their GPS units had been programmed with false coordinates, ensuring that any rescue attempts would search in the wrong locations. The students had been systematically isolated and made helpless before the actual kidnapping took place. Security camera footage from a gas station 50 kilometers from their campsite showed a convoy of 3 black SUVs following the students' jeep at a discreet distance. The vehicles had no license plates and their windows were heavily tinted, but facial recognition software later identified 2 of the occupants as former military personnel with specialized training in interrogation and assassination. These were not random criminals or opportunistic killers, but professional operators working for an organization with resources that rivaled government agencies. The cabin where the students died was just one of 7 similar facilities operated by the criminal network across Western Canada. Search teams eventually located the remains of 34 other victims buried at these sites, including environmental activists, government inspectors, freelance journalists, and amateur naturalists who had gotten too close to the truth about the illegal logging operations. Each facility had been designed for extended torture and interrogation, equipped with medical supplies to keep victims alive as long as possible and industrial disposal systems to eliminate evidence after they finally died. The structure behind these murders was revealed through encrypted communications found on seized computer servers. The illegal logging network operated like a military unit, with strict hierarchy, coded language, and compartmentalized information that prevented any single individual from understanding the full scope of the operation. The students' killers were mid-level operatives who received orders through encrypted channels and reported their progress to supervisors they had never met face-to-face. Financial records showed that the criminal organization had spent over $14 million on security operations between 1995 and 2003, including payments for surveillance equipment, weapons, vehicles, safe houses, and the salaries of more than 40 full-time security personnel. They maintained safe houses in 12 cities, operated a fleet of unmarked vehicles, and employed retired intelligence officers to handle counter-surveillance and witness elimination. The students had challenged an organization with resources that exceeded those of most law enforcement agencies. The investigation revealed that similar criminal networks operated illegal resource extraction across Canada, including illegal mining operations in the Yukon, unauthorized fishing in protected marine areas, and black market wildlife trafficking throughout the Northern Territories. The illegal logging operation was just one branch of organized crime that generated billions of dollars annually while systematically murdering anyone who threatened their profits. Environmental protection had become a deadly occupation in regions where criminal organizations operated with impunity. The Canadian wilderness reclaimed the area where the cabin once stood. New trees are growing through the foundation, and within another generation, the forest will show no trace of what happened there. But buried beneath the growing roots and decomposing leaves, fragments of evidence remain. Pieces of bone, scraps of cloth, traces of the 4 young people who died for asking the right questions at the wrong time. Their story serves as a reminder that some secrets are worth killing for, and some people are willing to commit murder to protect profits that depend on environmental destruction. The case file remains open, officially unsolved, waiting for evidence that will never surface or witnesses who will never come forward. Meanwhile, illegal logging continues across Canada's protected wilderness areas, worth billions of dollars to criminal organizations sophisticated enough to make people disappear without leaving traces. Cassian Walsh, Meridian Chen, Tobias Aldridge, and Serafina Voss are remembered by their families and forgotten by a system that failed to protect them when they were alive and failed to deliver justice after they were dead.